Good to see a full wintry morning. The sun is shining, the sky is blue, all is well on Zoom at least. All is not well in the world around us, of course, as we know. But we're happy to be gathered here together for our gathering that we've been calling this year Behind the Curtain, as I have the privilege of joining with my colleagues, Maharat Rori Picker Neiss of the JCRC, soon to be working for the JCPA. And we're very happy for you, but sad for us and our community at the change in your professional role, but excited that you're going to continue to be doing really important and good work for the Jewish people and for our community and many communities. And my other colleague, Rabbi Daniel Bogard of Central Reform Congregation. It's really such I know I speak for me, but I think I speak for all three of us, that this is one of the highlights of our work that we do. Just first of all, for us to get to spend some candid time breathing and talking and listening and being together, and also sharing our thoughts, kind of our inside thoughts, with those of you who have the patience and the desire to join us and sit through and eavesdrop in on our conversation. And we're really happy that so many of you continue to be interested in the work we're doing. We're in a transitional time for our work together as this calendar year comes to a close, and we haven't yet had the chance to finalize what our plans might be for 2024 and beyond. So we're going to just leave you all hanging, wondering, and we're going to be remaking our work together in different ways, and we'll get back to you as soon as we know more details. We wished we had been able to come up with a firm plan for the new year, but our time may very well be changing. The content may change, but we would like to continue to do this sort of work together in some way. And we'll get back to you all, keep you all waiting and wondering. For today, our thought was to reflect publicly and here together on a few of the questions that have been keeping us up at night, some of the questions that have been really filling our days and nights with curiosity, with angst, with challenges from many directions in our professional and personal lives. And so I'm just going to sort of navigate a few of those by throwing them open to you, Daniel and Rory, and myself to reflect on, and also to invite those who are logged in with us on our webinar to please post your questions and engage with us as well as we talk about it. The first topic on our list of things that have been on our mind a lot, and there's a lot that's on our minds, is a question that has been swirling around really since October 7th, but has continued, I think, for many of us to deepen and become more perplexing. And that is the question, I'll give it a one-word title, and I think everybody will know what the topic is. The one word is, it's a compound word. The word is ceasefire. And so, well, maybe we'll just play a little game. What do you think of when you hear the word ceasefire? Daniel or Rory, if one of you wants to just kind of begin.
So I think it's so important, first of all, like, thanks for thanks for the kind words, and thanks for throwing us into the deep end, Jim.
That's what I'm here for.
I think it's so important when we have this conversation that we need to realize that all of the words that we're using are incredibly loaded words, and that they have meanings for so many different people. And I think we can talk about this with ceasefire, and I'll say a little bit more about that in just a second, but I think it's important to recognize that this is true of so many words in our vocabulary right now, that we say something, and I might mean one thing when I say the word, and you might hear something different when you hear the word. And if we're going to have a real conversation about it, then we need to find out what we're actually talking about and what's at stake for each of us, rather than just focusing in on my definition of the word needing to be the definition of the word. And so I have really been, I feel like, ping-ponging in this space where I've been watching through social media, through friends, through colleagues, through people that I know in so many different ways, where I'm seeing people having a conversation over here and people having a conversation over here, and they're using the same words, but they mean something totally different. I really believe that the vast majority of people who are calling for a ceasefire, I'm not going to speak on behalf of all of them, but I think overwhelmingly, I think the people who are calling for a ceasefire mean to say, I hate seeing the suffering of people, and I don't like seeing that civilians are dying, or by the way, soldiers are dying. I don't want any more people to be hurt or injured, and I want a solution that ends the violence so that we can start to work towards something more lasting and sustainable. And in certain ways, I've actually been angry at our Jewish communal institutions, who I think have taken this word and they use it to mean, because I think for the people who don't like the term ceasefire, what they're basically saying is that you can't call for a pause. We need sustainable, long-lasting change that recognizes the harm that Hamas did to the Israeli population and to the wider population, and that we can only move forward with something that actually is systemic change so that these conditions don't exist again for this to ever happen again. And I frankly, like, those sentiments, I agree with all those sentiments. I don't want to see people dying. I want systemic change. I don't want those conditions to ever repeat themselves. I don't think it's fair, though, to tell people that if they're saying the word ceasefire, that means that they are pro-Hamas or pro-terrorism or any of those things, any more than I think the people who are saying no ceasefire, we need something more, are not saying that they're pro-war either. And so I'm glad you're throwing us into this, Jim, and I'm happy to talk about all of this. But like, I've actually found at this point the word ceasefire almost feels unhealthy because it's become a trigger word for people rather than actually saying, what are the values that we're holding in this moment and how do we move forward carrying those values?
Thank you so much for framing it that way, Daniel. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm really glad Rory went first. That was so much better or so much more coherent than anything I have. And I truly agreed with everything you just said, like every word. I feel like I felt very represented in those words. So thank you, as always. I'm just back from a week in Israel, and what I actually find is that I'm less coherent now than I was before I went, and I'm over the jet lag now, so it's not that anymore. Yeah, I mean, I guess I have one sense that says I also think people should just frankly care less about our politics and what we think about Israel. None of us are political scientists. I think Rory gets the closest, actually, in terms of your professional work. But right, I'm also really struck by how much our jobs and institutions aren't built for this moment. That in profound ways, particularly Jim, for the two of us, Rory, I'm exempting you only because of your JCRC, JCPA work. But true of you also, that we're in the business of meaning making from stories, right? We take stories and we try to help people find meaning in their lives and hope in their lives and inspiration in their lives from these stories and the story they tell themselves. And that's the opposite of what we need to be doing when it comes to Israel and Palestine right now. That's my real takeaway from a week there. And I know I'm avoiding this question somewhat, is that we have to do a better job of not turning these places and these real people into memes and just seeing them as real in all of the complexity of it. And that is the opposite of what we do in our synagogue spaces. And I think if we take real, honest looks at Israel and Palestine right now, it's not going to be hope-giving and inspiration-filled. And that's tough. So I want to start there. I thought I was going to come back from Israel and call for a ceasefire. I thought I was going to come back and add my name to that list. And I find myself on the less there. And I'm not entirely sure why. The closest I have to an answer is that I don't really understand how the world is better by adding my name to a ceasefire list, even though I want the killing to stop, just broadly in every place at every moment. And I know that the people I love in Israel will be hurt and feel betrayed by me saying these particular set of words right now. And I don't mean the politics of Israel. I don't mean standing in some imagined community of Israel. I mean literally the people I love in Israel. And so that's where I'm at right now, which isn't much of a coherent answer. I also have very much resonated with Bernie Sanders on how he has spoken about this, which surprises me. I was never a Bernie person, but yeah, there's my ramblings.
Well, no, they're very compelling and coherent ramblings, and I am grateful to both of you. I don't have a tremendous amount to add, but I do want to reflect just a tiny bit. First of all, I appreciate and am moved by each of your thoughtful perspectives, because they, when I hear you speak, Rory, I nod and I go, yeah, that makes sense to me. And I'm grateful for the insight of your approach. And Daniel, what you said it to me the other day as well, when you were talking about your reasons for not deciding to publicly call for ceasefire, reflecting on our, your, and I think many of our friends in Israel and their feelings, and they're living this on the front lines. I will say my own personal approach is similar to both of you, but slightly nuanced, maybe in a different way. First of all, Daniel, I agree with you. I am not a political scientist. I'm not a military strategist. I'm not a politician. I'm not I have no influence on the decisions on what to do to resolve the conflict. I will say that I have been extremely close for a while, actually, almost since the beginning of the conflict on October 7th. After a brief time when I was 100% convinced that the atrocities on October 7th warranted a military response. I used words that at the time made sense to me. They don't any longer, calling people inhumane and monsters. But I came quickly from there to the place that I've been ever since, which is, I'll say this publicly. I've not said these words publicly before, actually. I've said them privately, and I've thought about them a lot. I'm very close to saying I believe it is time for a ceasefire. And I'm not willing yet to say it and to sign on to, by the way, I heard this in your words, Daniel. I'm not sure what our signing letters means or does, other than inflame the communities who were trying to comfort and counsel and lead, and in your words, tell stories to. Like, I just, it's like posting memes, and it's like going on social media rants, and like, and so even though I want to say publicly, I believe a ceasefire is appropriate right now. I really do. I don't understand what seems, and I'm sure it's not, but it seems like a misguided or unguided military exercise that does not have any immediate purpose that is accomplishable. I also cringe, and I know you both feel the same way. I cringe at the scenes of utter destruction and devastation of buildings and land, but also of people's lives. And I resent members of the Jewish community who are essentially covering their ears and covering their eyes and saying, nobody has the right to say that, because Israel has the right to defend ourselves and destroy Hamas. I don't think these two stories are mutually exclusive of one another. I don't. And I just wish everybody would take sorry, before I finish that sentence, I also fear that as a result, a growing number of people are just simply walking away from this conversation at all, and are saying, it's so horrible and it's so complicated. I got other things to do. I gotta, pay the mortgage, pay the rent, buy groceries for my family, go to work, live my life, plan my winter vacation, whatever it is. And I worry that the complexity of this horrifying story that's playing out in front of us is driving people away when it should be driving us closer, but not driving us closer to take positions that are not nuanced, but driving us closer just to listen and talk and engage more. And Daniel, that's what I saw on Sunday when we were walking in that march in University City. I saw a lot of really passionate people who I know they care deeply about Israel, but when other people who care deeply about Palestinian lives or just all lives are screaming and saying, are you just ignoring this? What did we do? We drowned them out.
I said it to you as an aside while we were walking, Jim, but I mean, I guess how I really feel is that I want to carry a ceasefire sign and march in the Israel march, right? If you weren't at the march, there was the Israel march, and then to the side on the sidewalk was a Jews for ceasefire now. And I feel like that's exactly the nuance that is not allowed to exist right now. And I really mean that sense of carrying that sign, but being in the Israel march, because to me, it's a much easier question as to why I haven't been at a ceasefire march, which is that I am finding it extremely difficult to be in relationship with vocally anti-Zionist non-Jews right now.
Yeah.
Jewish non-Zionists, anti-Zionists, I actually think we need to listen to their voices.
I agree. We need to embrace them and affirm them and bring them into our big tent. We do. But I agree with you. Like, if you're screaming for ceasefire and you hate Israel, then you can't, I don't know how to, but I was with you, Daniel. I actually wanted to bring a ceasefire sign and walk down the middle of that street too, saying, I'm with you and I believe in a ceasefire. I'm with you and I hate war. When somebody quotes the book of Ecclesiastes and says there's a time for war and a time for peace, I go, really? This is just a time for war? We should just abandon our hopes for peace? And I know that's simplistic and I know it's naive and I've been called worse, but I'm with you. And that's where I am. But we have a few questions. Maybe we should.
Well, we have some comments in the chat, and I actually want to sort of address. I'm not going to answer some of the questions because I actually think part of what I think is really critical in this moment is all of us leaning into where we have strengths and where we have voices. I give so much thanks in this moment that it's not my job to answer these questions. I don't know. I mean, this is the conflict that I sit with. I don't know what it looks like I don't know what resolution looks like. I don't know if it's possible to have a treaty with Hamas. I don't know. And frankly, that's why that's not the work that I do each day. But I want to also say that if it's not the work that the rest of us do, that it's this negative pressure that we're faced, that we're all being forced to pick a side or to come to conclusions rather than say where we actually are or what we hold. And so that's why, for me, I think it's really important to come at this from a values place. I mean, what I'm hearing you both say, and I think, like I said at the beginning, I think these words are really charged for me. So I don't know that I would be comfortable personally holding a ceasefire sign, but not because I want fire, right? Like this is the whole thing. I think just it's become so charged. But for me, any conversation that we're having that does not center humanity of people is an impossible conversation. And what worries me so much is that there are so many people in the world right now, I don't just mean in our Jewish community, who want this to be a moment of moral clarity. Because moral clarity, it's easy. We all sleep well at night. It's really simple to put a sign on our yard, on our lawn, and to change our Facebook page, or to share a meme, or to put out a tweet. And frankly, if your whole opinion can fit neatly into any of those boxes, then I'm not really very swayed by it. We want this to be a moment of moral clarity. And I think the world needs more people who are comfortable sitting with conflicting ideas. I mean, this is maybe the theme we keep coming back to, right? The heart of many rooms, right? Like, we're capable of holding all of these things. And so, yeah, I don't know what it looks like, but I know that if having moral clarity necessitates that you say every person who dies in Gaza was secretly a terrorist, or every building that's destroyed, right? Like if we have to craft a narrative, or we use dehumanizing language and we start calling people animals or barbarians, or terms that enable us to feel not only less guilty but justified, or to me, in the worst case scenario, celebratory at the death of a person, then I think we have lost so much. I I can sit with, and again, I don't have to know the answers. I don't know. I recognize, I don't think that Israel was wrong for responding to the terror attacks against Israel on October 7th. I don't think that was a wrong move. I don't think that Israel did anything inappropriate. I think that's a normal way of countries and all of those things. I don't know what the proper military, that's all beyond my pay grade. I'm not going to pretend to know, but I could understand and even not begrudge or even support Israel taking military action in response to a direct attack, while still feeling incredibly saddened and mourning the fact that there are people who died as a result of that, most of whom are caught in the middle between a whole bunch of other parties. And so that's what I want to keep talking about. I want to talk about what is a solution that lifts up the safety and security for the most people, that enables every person to go back to their homes and live the lives with freedom, with choice, with safety, with peace. I don't know the answer to that, but I know that that's what my values are. And I know that's what I want to push. And so if a ceasefire could get there, then great. And if the ceasefire doesn't get there, then I want to talk about other solutions. But like, I'm not interested in talking about the political solution. That's not my job. I'm interested in saying, like, who are we as a people? Because if in the process of getting there, we've lost the thread of humanity, then I don't want to be who we are in that story.
Well, and I think that's the other meaning of ceasefire right now. And you both raised this, which is totally having nothing to do with Israel and Palestine and Gaza and suffering and war, but everything to do about signaling who you are standing with in this moment, right? And that's why, Rory, you can say something like, I'm not sure I would hold a ceasefire sign, and Jim, you and I can say something like, we almost say that we're calling for a ceasefire. And that almost is because the meaning of that word right now is not about actually the geopolitics that we could magically wave a wand and put into place, or obviously can't in Israel and Palestine, but is about the ways that it states who we are standing with in this moment right here in these alliances.
Yes, thank you both for your clarity. And we obviously, we have to be very careful about the words we use and what we intend them to say and what others understand them to be. And it's interesting to read the comments that have been posted, because I agree with all of you that depending on how we define the words that we are choosing and what we are saying, we communicate something clear. And where I struggle is that I have been using these weeks and now months since this war began to try and further educate myself, not only about what's happening now, because there's a blur of war and responses to it, but I've been diving in deeply into trying to understand the roots of this conflict in a way that, and I don't say this to pat myself on the back, but I have been open to reading and studying and listening to voices that have tried to understand not only what's happening now, but the roots of this conflict between Jews and Palestinians, between Israel and Palestinians, in a way that is more open-minded than I ever have done in my life. And I've been really deeply disturbed to discover things that themselves are contested by highly politically charged voices on both sides, but to discover things that make, and I know at the beginning of the war, when anybody would say, well, what led up to this? What caused this? And the answer is, nothing justifies terror. I've reminded myself and been really immersing myself in the fact that we Jews who support Israel and non-Jews who support Israel also might have some reckoning to do within our own souls and our own stories of parts of our own behavior over the last 100 years or more that are not dissimilar to, and I know I'll probably get completely flamed for what I'm about to say, but the behavior of Jewish terrorists in the establishment of the State of Israel at times is eerily similar to the behavior of the Hamas terrorists who are trying to destroy the State of Israel. And I think that we need to exercise humility in trying to understand and unpack a conflict that did not actually begin on October 7th, and it is not going to end with the Israeli government and army completely flattening Gaza, if that's where they end up going, as some of them have stated is their intention, like to stomp out the ants that live in Gaza, or whatever beautiful imagery they have floated out to this war is not going to end any quicker than it began. And it does not have its roots in October 7th. October 7th did not happen in a vacuum. I'm not justifying it. I'm not approving of it. I think it was heinous. But, my mother always taught me 2 wrongs don't make a right. And I feel like the Jewish community feels wholly self-righteous on behalf of the State of Israel's right to do whatever it needs to do to eliminate what we have now labeled as pure evil without trying to resolve the underlying conflict, a conflict that we have been told repeatedly by communal leadership and Jewish leadership across the world we can't talk about now. A conflict, now is not the time to talk about the injustice of the occupation. Now is not the time to talk about the potentially colonial enterprise of Zionism itself. And not to say it's not legitimate, but to say, but can you understand it through lenses other than our own myopic lenses that we as a Jewish community are watching it? So those are my thoughts. We can keep talking about ceasefire and war, or we could shift to another equally disturbing word. So last thoughts before we shift, maybe.
Well, I want to jump in on what you're saying, and I'm not going to be able to respond to all of the points, but I'm sitting with your description of doing something, Jim, that I think is actually incredibly unusual today, which is trying to actually understand the full argument. And I want to acknowledge in this space that sometimes we've had criticism in this conversation of people saying we all agree with each other. And I've often said, and I want to just say again, right, I don't agree with everything that you just said, but I'm trying to sit with it. I'm trying to hear you. And that's a really key difference. And I don't feel the need to respond to you point by point. But what I really admire and something that I'm really thinking a lot about is, what does it look like to actually enter into a real conversation, or really try to hear where people are, not because you have to be convinced of another perspective. You might be. I think if you're genuinely going in, it has to be with the possibility that you could be moved and changed, but with the understanding that standing on our moral high ground doesn't actually get us anywhere. And it feels great. It feels so good to chant into our own echo chamber, and for all of the people who like us already and who agree with us to say, yes, you're doing fabulously, but it doesn't actually move anything forward. And it doesn't help anybody. And frankly, the people who are actually suffering are also not helped by the retweets or the cheers or whatever it is that's coming. I want to share, so I've actually been doing some training with resetting the table. I don't know if either of you have done it, if other people. I actually haven't. I've always heard about the great work that they do, but I've never actually done any of it with them before. And so it's something I've been thinking so much about, in part because it's been such a fabulous experience. For the people who don't know, Resetting the Table is an organization that is specifically trying to create more spaces for people to engage in these dialogues, particularly around Israel and Palestine. But they have tools that they use. And a big part of it is actually this. It's I need to listen to the person first. I can ask a clarifying question, and then I'm going to say back, did I hear you correctly? And it's not a repetition, but it's trying to distill, like, okay, here's what I heard you say, Jim. And with the idea that when you have felt heard, you can then actually have a really productive conversation. Now, sometimes we end up in totally different places, but what I've also been finding in the group that I've been doing it with is that they at one point had us do an exercise where you have the spectrum of the room. So one side is agree and one side is disagree, and you can put yourself anywhere on the line. And they said a sentence, and then we put ourselves in wherever we were on the spectrum. And then they wanted us to find someone who was at a different point in the spectrum and practice this exercise to have a conversation. And so I sat down in this group and we did all of this. And what was also interesting, and now I've done this a couple of times, and in each time, what it actually turned out was that what we were disagreeing about was actually not the sentence that they said. We were at opposite ends of it, but it was really because we maybe defined the terms differently, or because what we thought was at stake was different. Like, we actually agreed on, I would say, 75% of what we ended up talking about, but because we prioritized a different part of the sentence, or we understood the sentence to mean something different, we put ourselves at other poles. And you only start to know that when you actually are willing to engage with people. And that's the part that I think our community needs. And that's also what I'm hearing you criticizing, Jim, is that process is terrifying for institutions who want party lines. It doesn't fit. Everything we're saying does not fit on a sign to carry in a march. It does not fit neatly into any of these spaces. And for the organizations that want us to change our Facebook picture or to post this meme or whatever it is, like, that stuff doesn't work. And there's this fear that we have that if we present a different perspective to people, then they might be swayed by it, and then our ground will lose traction. Rather than recognizing what I think you're also saying is that we've already lost traction with people. If you say to somebody, you're with me or you're against me, then what's going to happen is that you might just choose against me. You might choose with me, but you might choose against me. And I don't think we can afford that either. And what it means to actually hear people to say, you know what, actually, I disagree on 60%, but I agree on 40%, or I'm willing to actually lean into this space, I think is so critical. And that's the part that I keep saying, I don't know the answers to these questions, but I know that if we're actually willing to talk about it, we can get closer to the answers. But if we all just keep repeating our party lines, we're never going to get any closer.
Yes, I think that's so true, Rory, and I think it's really well spoken and accurate. Also, look, this hasn't been said, but it should be, and this actually maybe will move us in the direction of another of the topics we wanted to talk about a little today. I think there is a fear that underlies much of the towing the party line that you're referring to. And that's a very real, genuine fear. People feel vulnerable. They feel afraid. They feel threatened. If Israel has been threatened as it has been, people worry, people have verbalized this. We're next. I think this has unearthed not only the anti-Semitism that is being described in, and worried about in the progressive community, but even a more fundamental lurking anti-Semitism that people fear is everywhere under the surface. And I think people, as a result, people don't want to listen and be nuanced. People want to find a comfortable place that feels safe and secure. The other, and I'll be just a momentarily cynical, a lot of institutional Jewish communal positioning, I think, is because motivated by and because of the potential for fundraising. And I think that a lot of positioning and simplistic answers raises more money for worthy causes, absolutely for worthy causes, but it raises more money. And I worry that our values and our honesty and our intellectual curiosity about the other is often shaded by our fear. Look, I experience it as a congregational rabbi. Daniel, I suspect you have some of the same thoughts. You know, if what I say or don't say is perceived wrong, somebody will quit the congregation and go somewhere else where they are in more of an echo chamber that resonates with their own, what they want. And look, I respect the right of people to do that, but that's sad, and it's unfortunate if people, you know, it's what we've been experiencing for years in this country, where people only listen to Fox News or they only listen to CNN or MSNBC or whatever it is, as opposed to a curiosity on people's part. I wonder if what I think I know isn't the whole truth, or maybe the truth at all. I've been trying really hard to educate myself on both ends of the spectrum, and some of what I've been discovering has been really disturbing. Things that I thought I knew really well my entire adult life, I've been discovering there. And I'll give you one example. I've studied, as I'm sure both of you have as well, the writings and words of Theodore Herzl and Zev Jabotinsky and all the early Zionists in great detail. I thought I knew everything they'd said. I've discovered things that nobody ever taught me. Nobody ever asked me to read. Things that are really troubling. They're disturbing. Do they destroy my commitment to Israel? No. But I'm asking people to expand our reading lists. You know, I see somebody, Arlene just asked, you know, I'll tell you what I'm reading right now. It's very controversial, very disturbing. It's been on the New York Times best-selling list. I actually have it right here on my desk. It's called The 100-Year War on Palestine.
I'm reading it right now too, Jim.
Is it gospel? No. It's highly criticized. Benny Morris, a great historian of Israel, has written a scathing review of it. But if we don't read anything, we are reading nothing. If we're just relying on what we think we know, we are not opening ourselves up to what Rory just described eloquently, which is, how do we listen to the point of view of the other? And will that lead to a ceasefire? I don't know. Is Hamas reading anything? No, of course. I don't think they are. But neither is the Israeli military establishment. Everybody thinks they know everything they need to know. And the rest of us who are out here maybe should be listening more, learning more, clarifying what we think we know with what we are now learning. Maybe we'll all grow. And I hope we will. So can we shift maybe to another word? Since we've exhausted.
I just want to throw out one more plug, which is for the Ezra Klein podcast, which I think has been doing a great job too. Ezra, I think, is doing exactly what you're talking about, Jim. His last episode
was brilliant.
In an attempt to understand Hamas's perspective.
Yeah.
Not in order to preach it or, accept it, but that if we're going to in any way begin to find a better future, it's going to start with understanding.
Yes.
Yeah.
And to add, if you don't already have it, add +972, one of the most respected and objective news sources in Israel, +972. They have a podcast. You can subscribe to their news service. Are they universally respected? No. But nobody's universally respected, whether they're scholars or media. But to expand what we're listening to not just be that echo chamber, but to try and understand some of the most, authentic voices that are trying hard, even if we don't like what they say. And I don't like a lot of what I read. But I'm with you. Ezra Klein's podcast is a really brilliant source of insight. He's am I 100% in agreement with him? No, but he brings thoughtful voices from all sides of the story to bear.
I want to add one more thing, not a reading list, but I want to add, I think it's so necessary for us to interrogate in ourselves what's at stake for us. So I'm finding that to be a process for me also, that there are times where, um, when I hear people who are highly critical of Israel in some of these spaces, particularly in some of the ceasefire spaces, where I realize that like my discomfort is not necessarily around having a particular opinion about military strategy that Israel's utilizing. I don't really know enough about it to have an opinion on that. But I think like there's a fear and a vulnerability that I have. I have a fear and a vulnerability after October 7th when we saw these attacks and felt really scared. And I think I also feel this fear and vulnerability of like what happens to the Jewish community in this public conversation. And I think that's valid, right? But like I have to hold that and name that, because if my response then is to dismiss criticism of Israel because I'm holding a separate fear, then I'm also having a different conversation than what this other person is. And so there is a lot at stake in these conversations. I'm not saying that to say there's not, I'm saying that to say there is. But we need to realize, like, what is it that's coming up for me? Am I actually, am I having a conversation about anti-Semitism when someone else is having a conversation about military strategy? And so I think there's a lot of us who are doing that because these are so charged. And what's this person actually trying to talk to me about, and so forth. So I've been struggling like honesty with ourselves is not the easiest of things to do. And I just want to push us to ask ourselves, like when we feel threatened or uncomfortable in a conversation, what are we actually feeling is at stake for us in that conversation?
Rory, that's so beautiful. I just want to add a postscript to that because it's so insightful and so thoughtful that you shared that. I want to say this, and I'm not going to say this asking for sympathy for us, but rather to ask for a shared compassion for all of us. I don't know whether people know and understand how brutally difficult. Look, I don't want to compare what we're going through to what the Israelis are going through or what the people living in Gaza are going through. War is hell. I mean, there's no other way to describe it. We all have dear friends who are deeply depressed or traumatized, and I am certain that people living in Gaza are as much or more traumatized by what's happening. But in a different way, the last 2 months have been brutal emotionally for many people, if not most people, but especially, not especially, but in a different, unique way, to communal Jewish leaders, rabbis, teachers. I don't think people know that, or if they know it, they don't think about it. The things that are being said, the demands that are being placed on, the search for authenticity that we all are in the midst of. Many of us have been on the brink of tears or deeply in tears regularly. And I'm not asking for sympathy, but I am urging all of us to be more compassionate with each other. And by extension, I personally think we should try and be more compassionate with everybody. And that's what bothers me most about war. I understand that there are such things as just wars that must reluctantly be fought. And I do recognize that what happened on October 7th led to a just military action. I'm not sure it is any longer. I'm struggling with whether what's happening is just and humane. But regardless, why can't people regain our humanity? For me as a Jew, for me as a rabbi, for us as Jewish leaders, I think that is why we're in this business in the first place, to make the world more just and compassionate and caring. And when Jews start acting like we don't care about that, we just want to care about us, then we lead ourselves into that, that spiraling, slippery slope that leads us to think, well, everybody hates us. Everybody's anti-Semitic. Anti-Semitism is lurking under every rock, and therefore we have to circle the wagons and just be afraid. And I just don't believe that. So maybe we should shift and talk about this question of anti-Semitism. How are you feeling How are you feeling about anti-Semitism, Daniel, Rory?
Uh, so I agree with everything you said, other than the metaphor of anti-Semitism not under every rock. I actually think the place I've come to is I've become an anti-Semitism fatalist. I think where I have come to is realizing that Jews exist as mythological creatures in the stories of every Christian and Muslim, every person who exists in a Christian or Muslim cultural context. And absolutely, the United States is a Christian cultural context. And I really think I've gotten to a place where what I've realized is that as long as we exist as those mythological creatures, right? There's 16 million of us. We're not that much larger than the population of, in fact, we're about the population of, I think, Los Angeles, right? Total Jewish population. Israel and Palestine combined are about the population of Chicago, greater Chicago. But we're more famous than Barack Obama, right? We are in the mythology, literally, and mythology in terms of just the story that people living in those cultures tell themselves about who they are. And I really have come to believe that as long as we exist as mythological creatures, which I think is inescapable in those cultures, that anti-Semitism as we understand it is inevitable downstream of that, which is a new way of thinking for me. I mean, which is to say, I had never understood anti-Semitism as sort of structural before, and I don't think it's structural in the sense of how our societies are put together, right? The United States very clearly does not operate on an axis of anti-Semitism. It operates on an axis of white supremacy and whiteness and blackness, and that's the primary divide here. That may be different in Europe and maybe different in some Middle Eastern countries too, but but secondary to that, as long as we exist as mythological creatures, I think the potential for anti-Semitism is always there, and the possibility of anti-Semitism is unavoidable. And that's a new way of understanding it for me.
So I hear that, and I need to sit with that more. And I definitely have found that my foundation has been shaken recently. I think whenever we're facing crises, I think it's always important to ask ourselves who benefits in these moments of crisis. And I think that there are ways in which the non-Jewish world benefits from anti-Semitism and from the mythological view of Jews that often leads to the scapegoating of Jews and all of that. But I also have really been struggling with the fact that I think that our Jewish community is also benefiting from anti-Semitism.
Yes,
And I
yes,
want to
yes,
be,
yes, yes.
yeah, I
And
want to
it's the
be really,
mythologization of Jews and of Israelis, which we're so engaged in too. And sorry, keep going, Rory.
no. Well, you can like build on it, right? Well, I think like part of it is there's the mythologization. Why'd you have to start us with this word, right? Like
It's such a tough word. I know. Yeah.
there's that component of it, but also like there are Jewish institutions who have been working to create unified fronts of Jews for a long time, at a time where our Jewish community has been leaning heavily into liberalism and individualism and has been shifting away from centrist communal institutions, and who I think have found that anti-Semitism is the single greatest uniting force, especially now that Israel is not the single greatest uniting force. And so the number of times that so many of us are being messaged, it doesn't matter if you don't see yourself part of the Jewish community, they do, and they're going to round you up, right? Like that's right. Like, what's the definition of a Jew?
So donate.
Right. But it's like, what's the definition of a Jew? Who gets put into the cattle car? I mean, like this like identity that comes from persecution. And so I don't think that our Jewish communal institutions invented anti-Semitism. First of all, like it long predates, I mean, it almost feels like it predates Jews even, right? But like it absolutely goes way back. But the ways in which I think that a lot of our institutions are not incentivized to actually do real work or to amplify anti-Semitism or to even like contribute, right? What we're not doing is so look, I don't know that you can ever get rid of anti-Semitism. By the way, I'm not convinced we can ever get rid of Hamas either. Like these are ideologies. You can't eradicate ideologies. We can make them unpopular. We can try to destroy leadership, but you can't get rid of an idea. I mean, this is part of the painful reality. But we're also like I think to exactly your point, Daniel, of the ways in which we exist as myths, like we're not actually working to demystify our Jewish community. If anything, we love like for Christian Zionists, we want to be their myth. Like we think that that's like a strength all of a sudden. Like we lean into these, and so I am so angry about this because I don't I want to be careful what I'm saying. I'm not saying that our Jewish institutions are 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 anti-Semites themselves. I'm not saying that they're like funding anti-Semitism. I want to be careful, but I do think that our Jewish communal institutions are not actually incentivized to do any real work to educate around or really combat anti-Semitism, and that the ways in which our community is feeling a fear of anti-Semitism, I think is based on a real kernel, but has been amplified and magnified significantly because of institutions that benefit from, whether monetarily, whether because that's more likely to get us to show up in marches, whether because we're now buying jewelry or ribbons or t-shirts or whatever it is that we're buying. Like there are people who are benefiting from this, and it makes me so angry because I think our Jewish communal institutions are using us as puppets just as much as the rest of the world is right now.
I agree, Daniel. I know you want to say something, so go. And then
I was just going to add that, yes, Rory, and very much right. Like I think we have to get to a place where we understand that, yes, the anti-Semitism we are seeing from progressive spaces right now is because of the mythologization. I think I said that right. Maybe there was an extra Z there of Jews, but also the way that Joe Biden supports Israel is because of the mythologization of Jews. And the reason that evangelicals support Israel is because of the mythologization of Jews. In that, if we are to understand anti-Semitism as inevitable and downstream of that, we have to understand that the mythologization of real Jewish lives and the reality of Israel as a geopolitical state and Israelis as real people is downstream of all of those, and any of those veins can be flipped and turned anti-Semitic, right? If there's any lesson of Jewish history, it's that.
Yes, and we have to be very careful not to end up blaming the victim. We have to be very careful, and simultaneously, we have to be even more careful not to, and I'm going to disagree a little, Daniel, even though I think I essentially agree with you that this.
No, I think we see anti-Semitism differently and have for a long time.
Yeah. This mythologization, or whatever the right pronunciation of the word is, this kernel of Jew hatred that seems to be embedded in human history. I think where I agree with what you're describing. I disagree about its inevitability and its permanence. I am not convinced that we as a Jewish community have successfully tried all the ways that we might respond that might not ultimately eradicate it. And I think that the emphasis throughout Jewish history on defense against anti-Semitism or in response to it has actually been destructive to the core essence of who we are as Jews. When we build our institutions, as I think both of you are describing, around the foundation of, well, anti-Semitism is out there and we need to build institutions and a Jewish state and our communities around anti-Semitism, rather than asking ourselves, so why do we exist in the first? Who are we? What are our core values? What do we stand for? And build our communities around those institutions. And I know I know I can easily be attacked for saying this as being naive again, that, well, they hate us. That's just embedded in human history. I'm not sure I don't accept that. I refuse to accept it.
I don't think they hate us as embedded. I think they imagine us as a part of their own story is embedded in Islamic and Christian cultures. I think that's unavoidable as long as there is such a thing as Islamic and Christian cultures, which is as close to unavoidable within I mean, right, like that is our reality that we live in. And I think anti-Semitism is downstream. I keep saying this, but downstream of that, and inevitable at various historical moments downstream of that.
Well, right, and then if you're correct, then the only solution is to imagine a world where there's only one religion and all these different, triumphalist streams.
I don't think so. First of all, I mean, I imagine that 5,000 years from now, if there are still human beings, that we will just have entirely different categories that we are discriminating around. But yeah, I don't think the problem is religion. I think the problem is mythologizing real people and real lives as a part of your own story when they're not. Right. And I think that is inevitable in Christian and Muslim societies. And that's why I keep saying societies. To me, this is not about faith. It's about the core myths that are constructing a society and the role that Jews play within those mythological imaginations.
Yeah, I guess what I'm saying is the more we lean into that, the more we enable it. The more we build our community around the anti-Semitism mythologizing of the Jew, I want to be careful here about what I say because I don't want to be misunderstood. The more we build more institutions that fight anti-Semitism, that protect the Jewish community, or that preserve the mythologizing by others of us, the more
demythologizing, that's the work. Yeah,
exactly. As opposed to, so what do you represent? What do you believe? It's like defining yourself by what you're not, as opposed to defining yourself by what you are. Then we're channeling communal resources into all the wrong things. We have I brought a new Jew by choice to the mikveh this morning, who is an incredibly exciting addition to the Jewish community, not because this person wants to be an antidote to anti-Semitism, which lots of people say that, oh, thank God we need more Jews right now because they're killing us, but rather this person is a human being with rich value and values that make us more who we are. And like, if we build our community around, I grew up, you guys grew up, the Holocaust, everybody hates us, that old joke, every Jewish holiday is, they hate us, they tried to kill us, now let's eat, that if that's who we are as a people, if that's where we're putting all our communal energy, rather than putting energy into what do we believe about the world, what do we want the world to look like, how do we build, that's what I'm trying to say. That, but if we accept this myth that others are imposing upon us, and we don't offer anything in its place, then who are we? Do you understand? I don't know what the answer is. It's exhausting.
No, I mean, I agree with you, Jim, in the sense that I think the only antidote is to build institutions that fight mythologization of Jews, not so that we don't have to build institutions that fight anti-Semitism. I also would look at it in the opposite direction, that I think Jewish identity and Jewish institutions have been built by anti-Semitism. But yeah,
I agree. Interesting. So I'm watching the clock. It's 12 o'clock. So let's shift just slightly for a few minutes to the question that has been really looming large in the last few days. For example, on the college campus, in American Jewish life writ large, is anti-Semitism, is criticism of Israel equated to anti-Semitism? Is it a form of anti-Semitism? We've talked about this many times in the past, but it's become a communal conversation writ large yet again. So any quick thoughts on that topic? Either of you?
I mean, I think I'm going to somewhat repeat myself, but I don't think putting anything fully into any category helps us at all in any of these conversations. So look, I think that there is real criticism of Israel that is allowed, warranted, justified, welcome. Israel is a country, and like every other country, there's ways in which we can agree and disagree with its policies. And I think that as a country in the world, people are entitled to have opinions on it. And I don't think we as Jews get to tell people in the world that they don't get to comment on Israel and, focus on other countries instead. And we also know that there are ways in which people use legitimate topics as dog whistles and excuses to get in other more heinous takes. And I'm saying it in a more general sense because I think this is true not only of anti-Semitism. I think that, right, like we've learned in this country, the ways in which people started to couch conversations about racism in conversations about crime or drugs, right? And so like you take things where like there are, certainly there have been people of color who have been arrested for selling drugs, but to have that conversation, to use it as a way to then talk about entire populations of people, or to not, like to what you said before also, like talking about the roots, like to not talk about the history of drug abuse in this country and the ways in which we persecute drug crimes differently, like persecute and prosecute, by the way, I do mean both of those. So like it's a yes. Like, are there people who are using criticism of Israel as a way to target a Jewish population and to couch anti-Semitism? I think that is a true thing. And I think it's hard to also unpack, when does that come out of ignorance? I mean, the number of times that I've met people and I've had to explain to them that I am a citizen of America and I'm not a citizen of Israel. I'm Jewish. I have a relationship to Israel. I don't vote in Israeli elections. I'm not a citizen there. And so, if you then like associate your entire Jewish population, or you criticize or fault a Jewish population in America for actions of Israel, I think that plays into anti-Semitic tropes. I think that, I think there's lots of ways in which the language can veer into anti-Semitism. But I also think it's erroneous to say to people like, oh, you can't criticize Israel unless you're also criticizing this list of other countries. Right now, there's a war going on. It's on the front page of the news almost constantly. And so we also don't get to tell people you don't get to talk about it either. And that goes back to what I was saying before, which is, how do we as Jews who are at the core of defining what anti-Semitism is, how are we actually educating and training people? So when we just say criticism of Israel is anti-Semitism, that's the all or nothing. We're shutting it down. And then people say, okay, then I'm just going to be critical and you don't get to be in the conversation. Rather than like, how do we actually educate people to say, here's what anti-Semitism is. If you do the following things, and I don't even just mean meet the following criteria. I don't think it's always so clear cut, but here are ways in which you're now getting into historical anti-Semitic tropes. Your language is starting to be microaggressions. You are like, these are dog whistles, like that you might have absorbed. Like, we need to be doing that so that we can say, like, here's how you have a better conversation. And I say this sort of tongue in cheek, like when you said, what do you think about anti-Semitism? My first answer was going to be like, I wish people were better at it. But I actually mean that sort of real, like we actually need to teach people how to actually be in this space. So yeah, like I don't have to like what people are saying, but I can still teach them to disagree with me without being offensive to me.
Beautifully put. Daniel?
Yeah, look, within me personally, one of the learnings that I have had over the last decade that I think has led to what I see as more personal ethical growth, I mean, entirely just within myself here, is the notion of racism, not racists. sexism, not sexists, right? There are some people who are sexist. There are some people who are racists, bigots. There are some people who are anti-Semites. But so often, actually, those labels are a way for us to avoid taking personal accountability and responsibility and understanding the ways in which I have been enculturated into sexism and white supremacy, racism in the United States, the ways that I serve those systems, the way that those ideas and worldviews have shaped who I am and how I see the world around me, the ways it impacts my personal relationships, my interpersonal relationships, right? And so I can see the ways that racism is within my soul and within how I operate. Misogyny is within my soul and how I operate. And that doesn't define me. It doesn't make me a racist or a sexist, right? And being able to get beyond that has helped me become a better person and work on those things internally. And seeing that I am never going to be able to escape those helps me be a better person, right? This is very controversial in some spaces to say things like this. I think mostly because they're not hearing that distinction. Look, I see a lot of anti-Semitism right now. I don't see a lot of anti-Semites right now. Particularly, right, I'm thinking about the left. That's the space, certainly that I exist in. And I see a lot of latent and rising anti-Semitism. But it doesn't make those people anti-Semites. I think I just said that. But look, to go to the dividing line and where my head's at, and the first piece that I would say is that I have a lot of humility here, and that I think I'm probably wrong, whatever it is that I think on this, and it's constantly evolving. And so put this down in the lightest shades of pencils. Look, I think at its core level, non-Jewish, non-Palestinian anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. I do think I have gotten there. That belief that the Jewish nation state should not exist as a Jewish nation state, absent a call for all nation states to disband, right, a particularizing of it. I think that's anti-Semitism. I don't think it makes the person who thinks it an anti-Semite, but I do think that. And I don't know that I would have said it that way before October 7th. I don't know that that's how I saw this before October 7th, but I'm really struggling with, truthfully, progressive groups that have been involved in no issues other than their one issue, who haven't shown up for abortion or trans kids, and are showing up around pro-Palestinian activism starting basically on October 8th. And these same groups telling me that they're creating spaces for Jews to deconstruct their Zionism. I think that's anti-Semitism playing out. I really, really deeply do. It's the only way that I can understand these groups. I mean, I got an email from a group I was highly involved in telling me that Jews, this is a group that doesn't have Jews on their board anymore or in their staff. Jews need to understand that anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism, and that they will be creating spaces for Jews to deconstruct their Zionism. And I don't have a frame other than anti-Semitism to understand that through. And again, I don't think those people are anti-Semites. I absolutely do not. And I think there's anti-Semitism there that I wish they could see and deconstruct. And I think it would make all of this better. And I think standing up for Palestinian lives is an incredibly essential thing and a sacred thing. And certainly being in support of a Palestinian state and Palestinian liberation and Palestinian sovereignty, and that Palestinians should live free of Israeli control and should have lives of dignity. And none of those things should be in any way anti-Semitic. And yet I also think we have to deal with the fact that the movement is infused often with anti-Semitism. And that's what I mean by the mythologization that is downstream.
I appreciate what you're saying. I just want to offer a slight, I don't want to contradict you, actually. It makes me very sad to hear you articulate it the way you're articulating it, but I have a slightly different angle at which I want to approach this and suggest that we, at our own peril, need to approach this, which is, first of all, I don't agree that necessarily all of these groups, and I don't think you intend to say that any non-Jewish, progressive group that is criticizing Israel or trying to create space for Jews to deconstruct their Zionism is necessarily, I don't believe that's necessarily a reflection of anti-Semitism. I think it may be. But for me, the nuance that I'm taking away, I'm very practical about this. I think that they are able to do this, in particular since October 8th, and therefore have been successfully doing it, is on us. We, and I mean writ large, the Jewish community, has not been creating space for Jews who may be critical of Israel to reconstruct a liberal Zionism that does not require the dehumanization of Palestinians or the denial of the Palestinian claims to sovereignty, and et cetera, that therefore, for me, the issue is my focus, my interest is less on calling out the possibility of anti-Semitism in our former progressive allies, with whom we are wondering, are they still our allies, or have we been, kicked out of the club, kicked off the island? My interest in, I think we restore relationships with them or not. That's not my primary interest. My interest is our Jewish community, particularly the younger, but not exclusively the younger part of our Jewish community. Many of them are crying out for us to join them in trying to reconstruct a liberal Zionism that is less mythological and more authentic and responsive. What's drawing them to go deconstruct their Zionism elsewhere, because they believe, and they're wrong, but they believe, they're wrong about me, they're wrong about you too. They believe that nobody in the Jewish community is interested in having this conversation with them. And to some degree, up until recently, they've been right. They've had to go to this other place because nobody will say it out loud. And we have to begin saying it out loud. We have to say, we're here, like we are, don't reject us. We have to invite them back in, and they may not come. They may not, but we have to.
I don't disagree with the fact that I think we need to create these spaces. I mean, this is also though what I think is like really important of like how we create these spaces. To the extent that like I have been not only recently, but just in my time at JCRC, horrified by the ways in which I have experienced very frequently non-Zionist or anti-Zionist Jewish spaces use anti-Semitic tropes in their rhetoric criticizing the Jewish community. And I to what Daniel said, I don't think that they are anti-Semites. I would not label them as anti-Semites, but I think it's a lack of understanding.
You're talking about Jews now, right?
Jews.
To me, I see a huge difference between Jewish anti-Zionists and non-Jewish anti-Zionists.
There might be, but my point though is that even within the Jewish anti-Zionist movement, there is anti-Semitic rhetoric that has taken hold, not because I think that they are trying to perpetuate anti-Semitic myths, but because I think they don't know how to have this conversation, and they like this is like because we have not actually helped our Jewish community, let alone our partners, understand what anti-Semitism is and how it functions. And so I would say like that's where like because we've just kind of thrown it all out, we haven't actually done any of that education. So yes, I think that we do need to be there, to be part of it. I also do want to go back though to what Daniel said, which is like I am really uncomfortable with the story that he shared. An organization that does not have Jews involved reaching out to Jews to demystify our Zionism is paternalistic at best, right? Like, and it is saying to me, oh, you silly, naive, brainwashed person, we can come help you rather than actually engaging or understanding what Zionism means to me, or that I can be an educated, committed, passionate, even liberal or progressive Jew who believes in the ideas of Zionism and might define, right? Because again, this goes back to where I started off. If you think Zionism is colonialist genocide, then no rational, reasonable person can believe in that. So therefore, you either have to think, I'm brainwashed, I'm an idiot, or what you're not actually engaging in is maybe that's not what I think Zionism is, and maybe that's your definition of Zionism, but not actually the Zionism we all embrace. So there's multiple levels within all of this, but that's exactly because what we can't do is we can't be those same people. We cannot go into spaces and treat anti-Zionist or non-Zionist Jews like they're uneducated, ignorant people that we are now going to suddenly deign to bring along. But if we're actually willing to have the conversation that we're having here today, if we're actually willing to say, let's name what makes us uncomfortable, let's name what we're scared of, let's talk about our values, let's talk about when we actually get into anti-Semitic spaces and what plays off of these historical dangers to Jews, like narrow a path together that doesn't have to equal a path that we agree upon, but can we actually have a real dialogue about it? And can we be okay sitting in a discomfort space of saying, you know what, you're still in my community, even if I don't like all of your ideas, which frankly is true of like the vast majority of Jews in our Jewish community, who I love dearly and disagree with vehemently on many a topic. Right? Then I think we can get to that space that I think you're aspiring to, Jim. And I think that's a worthy goal.
It is a worthy goal. And actually, as I watch the clock, I think it's a good goal on which to bring our conversation today to a close with this sort of vision of the future that is possible. It is. And you know, I have valued so deeply these conversations. I know the two of you feel so as well. We have some work to do. I'm speaking to our audience now. We have some work to do to figure out what comes next. Something will come next. We just need to do some work. And as we shape the next chapter of this conversation and this journey, and I'd just love to say thank you to the two of you for being on this journey with me and allowing me to be on this journey with you. Rory, regardless of what comes next with the three of us or this webinar, our friendship and our deep relationship is continuing and is so valuable. So maybe I'll give each of you, Daniel, maybe a chance to say a last word, and Rory, you get the last word of the last words today.
My last word, and this is like a Maimonidean read of Rabbi Tarfon here, I think, is that, Jim, I don't believe the world you are talking about is attainable, and I think we need to work towards it anyway. Yeah.
Thanks.
I just I'm so grateful for today, but I'm so grateful for this entire journey and for just both of your friendship, the openness. When I reflect back on the work that I've been able to do, part of it has just been the blessing and the gift of the space to be able to do it. We're having conversations that a lot of people aren't having, and that comes from colleagues who are willing to be brave and step into unknown spaces, and a community that's been standing here supporting us. And as I read the comments of appreciation, I think what we've realized is that we're going, it's not as scary because we know this is something that people have needed and have sought out. And so I just feel like this has been one of the greatest blessings, both this work and this particular program. And I'm sure this isn't the end of my journey with so many of you, but I am just so deeply, deeply grateful and feeling so very thankful for you all.
Amen. To be continued. And I'll just say lehitraot, until we meet again, how and whenever we meet again next. So thank you to the two of you, and thank you to everybody who's joined us, and stay tuned.
We really should have written like a cheesy closing music number.
That would
right
be
there.
so nice. Come
You
on,
mean like
Daniel.
your cheesy opening music that you
I don't think
have
I ever
yet
played
to
this for anyone
play?
else. I did write Rory at one point said that we needed
Theme
opening
song.
credit music theme song, and so I wrote a Four Rabbis theme song. I think it was the one that Scott Shaffron was in for. It was
Yeah. Well, it's not too late to bring it back.
Yeah, there you go. There you
Stay
go.
tuned, everybody. Happy Hanukkah.
Happy Hanukkah.
More light.
Everybody stay healthy. Yeah, more light.